Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. As always, I'm the host, Sean Boyce. I'd like to welcome my friend and guest today, Jonathan Bartlett, who is the Chief Product Officer at Troops. Hello, Jonathan. How are you? And thanks for being here.
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. Really great to be here, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Excellent. Thanks for that. If you could, please give for our listeners a little bit of background about yourself and how you ended up at Troops.
Sure. So I've been doing product since the late 90s. I started off in ad tech, moved to New York to be part of the ad tech industry in the very early days. I like to tell people I was one of the first DoubleClick customers. I moved on from ad tech into a company called Mimeo, which was the really kind of moving the needle on the web to print space. It was a bunch of city guys who got tired of going and standing in line at Kinko's, and they kept saying to each other, "Hey, there should be a service where I could just upload my document and it's printed somewhere and it's delivered to me the next day." And finally, they got so annoyed that they decided to go and start that company. I was at Mimeo for 12 years. I moved on from there to Contently, which is in the content marketing space, and then eventually to Monetate, which is in the e-commerce space. We sold Monetate last year, and I moved on to Troops. Really excited to be at Troops. Troops is a great company. What they're doing is so interesting and so differentiated from what a lot of other companies out there are doing. So it's really, really great to be part of the team.
Very cool. I especially like the story about Mimeo. Whenever a problem becomes too persistent for people that love solving problems, that's usually where some innovation comes from.
Yeah. They a bunch of really smart guys, and when they went to build it, it wasn't just, hey, let's go build a printing plant and start having online orders. They thought really hard about where to put it because they only had one factory up front, and they decided, let's put it at the end of the runway in Memphis, which is FedEx's North American hub. We had the latest cutoff time in North America. The trucks, the local guys from FedEx, if they were late coming back, they would come and put their stuff on our truck at our facility because they knew we had a later cutoff time than they did. And that enabled us to get stuff to customers really, really, really fast. We let customers order printed materials up until 10 o'clock at night and promise delivery anywhere in the 48 states by 8 a.m. the next morning. No one else could do service like that. It was a credible time learning how to not just develop technology, but how it meshes with real-time production on the floor of a plant and what that looks like, and how to really make that entire process from e-commerce transaction all the way through to delivery really fast and delightful.
That is super cool. And timing is everything. Impressive stuff. If you could give us a background as well too on Troops. What is Troops?
Sure. So, Troops, I think, answers the question of, how do I better work with some of these big systems of record that I'm working with? Troops started with Salesforce. There's a lot of Salesforce, people in the company, or they're very sales oriented. And I think one of the big struggles of any sales team in Salesforce is, how do I work well with the system? A lot of salespeople, frankly, just struggle to make it through the Salesforce interface. It's big. There's a lot of data, and based on who's running it, it could be more or less clunky sometimes. And when you want to do things fast, you don't have time, you need to keep things updated, it could just be difficult to get through. And the Troops guys thought, hey, maybe this is too hard. Maybe where they should be doing their work is where they're spending their day. And where a lot of people increasingly spending their day is in messaging platforms, right? Slack is a great example. So people are spending all day in Slack, and they said, hey, what if we just let them update their information for Salesforce there? So they basically integrated Salesforce with Slack. And obviously, there's all these integrations that a lot of these systems have. So you can just install a Salesforce bot. But Troops went a lot further, and they said, hey, let's let them build really complex workflows to figure out exactly what information to put in front of them in Slack at what moment, and then let them actually take action on it. So this developed to the point where Troops is constantly monitoring Salesforce for changes. Did something change? Did something not change? How much did it change? What were the ramifications of it changing? And we're constantly looking at that and figuring out, do you need to know about this? You can set up all sorts of workflow rules around what you want to monitor, who it should go to, what kind of messaging there should be, what kind of data people need. And then when something does or doesn't happen over time, or even on a scheduled cadence, if you just want to receive some type of reporting or information at the same time every day or once a week, we go in, we grab that out of Salesforce, and we put it in front of the people that need it. I like to say it's real-time revenue communications. We figure out what you need to do to react to the changing landscape of your business really, really fast, which is increasingly important for a lot of companies. And not only that, we actually help you take action on it. So right within Slack, we don't just put it in front of you, but we say, hey, what do you want to do? And often there's a number of actions, and you can just hit a button in Slack, and we push all that data back to Salesforce. We'll change the status, we'll update the numbers, we'll do whatever you want to do. And that makes it super easy for salespeople to really interface and get the information they need on the fly. In Slack, you could just do a slash command and basically call for any record from Salesforce, and we're able to surface it for you in seconds. And often that beats going to the Salesforce interface. Now, the Salesforce interface is always going to have its advantages. If you want to do super deep stuff, of course you're going to want to go there. But kind of for the stuff you need on the fly throughout the day and for making smaller updates, we help a lot. And increasingly, we're trying to figure out how to broaden that. So, how do we batch things together? Once a day, my sales manager wants me to update every single opportunity. How do we make that super easy for you and make sure you get it done to keep your sales manager happy?
Very cool. Thank you for sharing. If you could give us an idea what like a typical customer looks like for Troops.
Most of our customers today are rev ops or sales ops departments. It's often the people tasked with making sure the sales teams, the CS teams are super efficient. Up until now, Troops was very focused on really kind of the sales landscape. Increasingly, we've been moving into CS. And now we have underway a huge initiative to really broaden what we're doing across the enterprise. If you think about it, it's not just salespeople and it's not just Salesforce where there's an issue with how do I respond faster to this information. You have people all over the company that have 5, 10, 15 different systems that they're working with. And it's how do you stay abreast of everything going on in those systems and the data changing and new marketing leads coming in and changes in the status of retention customers. So we're looking, how do we take what we've done for sales and broaden it across anyone in the organization? How do you take a CS system or a marketing system or a tech system like Jira, and how do you do the exact same thing we've done with Salesforce, which is put some really smart logic in place to monitor it, figure out what's going on. And when we see something that you need to know right now, we surface it for you in a messaging platform or maybe via email or SMS or really wherever you need it. Where are you? Are you sitting in the office? Is it late at night? Is it a weekend? Are you on the golf course? We need to make sure it gets in front of you depending on how important it is so that you know what to do and you know what you need to take care of.
I can imagine that's got to be a big time saver for clients. It sounds like it would be.
Yeah. We had, I just got off a call with our CS team who quoted a customer saying yesterday that we are the wind beneath their wings, which was very nice to hear. And
I say that's some high praise right there.
Yeah, that's some great praise.
That's awesome. All that hard work's not gone for nothing, right? It seems to be pretty productive.
Yeah, it's incredible how much everyone at Troops knows about just all these systems and the inner workings of companies and how different companies manage their sales processes. It's incredible that they've basically seen across hundreds of companies how sales processes are run, what works, what doesn't, what data is needed. I almost wonder if we should just go in the operations consulting business. If I could really
I was just thinking that myself. It's got to be enlightening learnings from so many different use cases because there are a lot of companies. I'm sure the customers are trying to solve relatively similar problems, but probably like tips and tricks all over the place. Everyone's figured out different kind of unique way to do it and additional learning about where they found value as you're moving forward and introducing them to Troops.
Yeah. I think we tend to stay away from recommendations on how to manage their processes and more how do we actually help facilitate your process. But certainly our people have seen it all and know it all and definitely have their own opinions on what they've seen work and not, and, how they think different customers should and shouldn't run it. But, every company's different, every situation's different, and the needs are different across the bat. So you got to do what's right for you. And sometimes that just takes time and trial and error.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like Troops is a big part of that, helping facilitate it. So I want to talk more about the product, of course, but there's something that you and I have talked about before, which is, I think, not often spoken about enough. And I know you have this experience. I've spent some time in corporate and working in enterprise companies myself, and I know the world between startup and enterprise can be dramatically different. So kind of to lay it out for everybody else, what we talked about was that the way startups and companies, early stage kind of tech companies get built is they often are selling to companies that are either smaller or also startups like themselves. But then at some point throughout their history, what they ultimately want to do is they want to flip a switch and start selling to the enterprise. Now, with your experience, Jonathan, you've seen kind of the pros and cons of the approaches that you can take there with what you feel works and what likely also doesn't work. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about this based on the history of what you've seen from those companies and how they get built, and then ultimately what you might recommend to them if they have aspirations, if not now, but at some point to ultimately sell to the enterprise like Troops does.
Yeah, I have seen it a lot. I've worked, I've spent pretty much my entire career building, solutions, SaaS, B2B enterprise solutions. I've worked at big companies, small startups, companies over 1,000 people. My first job was at IBM. So I've seen a lot out there. And what I tend, and this is, I would say, especially over the last few years, what I tend to see is companies start off and they say, let's just really focus on the tech and not think so much about the go-to-market. Now, we can leave the go-to-market for later. We don't need to make money right now. Let's just perfect the technology. And once we have this great system that provides value and we show that it provides value, we're just going to take off. We're going to soar. And that's what they do. They get some technologists and they develop a platform and they start building it. And they start, giving it away or, selling it on the super cheap. And often they're doing that with companies they know. Startup founders typically hang out with other startup founders. It's just the way it is, right? There's like, almost like a little
Yep.
club there, and they know each other and say, hey, I'll use yours, you use mine, and we'll try each other's and we'll give each other feedback. And it kind of spreads out that way. And often it goes exactly as they planned, right? They start building the product, they start adding value, and other small companies start using it and say, oh, this is great. We love you guys. You're amazing. And it really builds your confidence. You think you're on a roll, and you build and you build. And eventually you say, all right, great. We built this great product. Let's go make some money. Let's go target those mid-tier those mid-market companies. Let's go after some big guys. Let's go whale hunting. And that's typically where they run into problems. And the reason is they really, really well architected their platform for an SMB. When I think of building solutions for enterprises, I think of, the first things that come to mind are security, right? Yeah, do you have all the certifications you're going to need? What is the go-to-market plan? How are you selling this? Is this a, enterprise, direct sale? Are you going in with enterprise salespeople? And you need to think through all of that, because that long-term is going to affect how your product is constructed. If you design it bottom up, where you think that people are just going to find you, that works great for some companies, especially when you're focused on individual users. If you can get enough individual users using it, that's a great way to do it. But if you are looking to do kind of a top-down SaaS sale to big enterprises, that's not going to work so well. You have to plan for what's it going to look like when a sales guy is sitting in front of the procurement department and they ask about SOC compliance or single sign-on, or how do you integrate with our employee management platform? And if you don't have the right answers to those, you're just going to get ruled out before they even come close to making a decision. It gets to be really, really hard. And that's typically where these companies start to struggle. They hit a certain point, and then it's like, oh, wow, we need all this stuff we hadn't planned for. And hey, we didn't really build the system really well to think about this. We didn't really think really well about how to scale the data 10x, or how fast it's going to run, and how we're going to deploy it to our new customer in Asia. These are the things they don't think about and that come to bite them later on down the road. Some companies, some startups can overcome it. Some can't, but I think it helps. And for the developers that I've seen go through this number of times, I think they increasingly look and think about, all right, if we're successful later on, what can I do now upfront in the architecture to make sure I'm well prepared for that moment, right? How do I think about, what my API strategy is going to be? How do I think about how integrations are going to take place? How do I think about security? And how do I make sure, even if I'm not building all of this architecture out right now in order to do this, that I'm building it in the right way so later it's extensible in that direction? When you don't do this, you're really causing a kind of a failure point for the company, where you almost have to stop and go back and work on a whole lot of stuff that for at least a decent amount of time isn't going to be driving additional value, because no one's going to be paying for that work. But if you don't have it, you can't make the sale. And that's where people get caught up.
I think you've articulated a really challenging topic very well. And a couple of things that you hit on there that I'm definitely familiar with as well too, especially like those certifications. Each one of those individually can take such a significant amount of time to get approved for, to make sure that you're checking all those boxes. Another one that I think about as well too, that I see startups struggle with, is not being prepared for an enterprise sales cycle and just how long it might take, and being prepared for, all of the milestones that you're going to need to hit throughout that process. I definitely want to talk more about the product, but this topic I think is really valuable because I think a lot of companies, a lot of startups especially, struggle to make this transition. I'd love to hear more from yourself because you have this expertise. You've taken several companies through this significant challenge. What is the right way? Like, we have an idea from what you've said, which is the right way to start thinking about it and getting started. But when do you, like, I guess, if you have an idea that enterprise is likely somewhere that you want to go, or at some point you've understood that, like, you're going to try to make that transition from SMB to enterprise, or you're going to look to try to incorporate it. At what point do you make a strategic change and start planning for that so that you'll be ready? Basically, I guess the question I'm asking is, like, how do you do it so that you're not building for something significant like that that's too soon, and then you end up spinning your wheels before you gain the traction? And also, how do you do it so that you're not trying to make that transition too late, and then you've put too much of a foundation in place and you really can't modify it at this point? Like, what's that threshold look like for you? What would you recommend for a company that ultimately uncovers that might be part of their future roadmap?
It, it's a really hard question because it depends a lot on what you see as the long-term vision of the company. If you're looking to have the market drive those decisions, then your first few customers are really important because you're going to tend to build in the direction of what your first few customers tell you are going to be really valuable to them. And if your first few customers are companies of 50 people, they're going to ask you to build out a lot of things that are going to be really valuable to companies of 50 people. If you get one customer and that customer is a huge enterprise, they're probably going to ask for enterprise level features, right? I think about, just how you think about structuring the organization and users and the different access and security, points that you need in the system to make sure the right people have access or don't have access to the right data and aren't allowed to do the right things. With a small company, if you have a customer of 25 or 50 people, they're not going to care, right? That stuff's all open. Everyone has access to everything. You get into a company of 10,000 people, there is no way you're getting in the door with that stuff. So I think the right customer mix up front, if you want to be an enterprise focused company later on, getting a few of them up front, hell, give it away for free if you have to, right? Just get a few of those types of customers that you want to have in your stable long term onto the platform early, so you can get that feedback from them and you can understand, if I want to sell to these types of guys 2-3 years from now, what's that sell going to look like? If you haven't done it before, you're going to be sitting in with procurement, right? And this is going to be a 6-month, 9-month process in some places, and it's going to be grueling. I've had customers, big global customers, where they brought me in, and it's like a firing squad of business unit leaders who just pepper me with every single question in the book. Sometimes ones that blow your mind, where they ask if you can do things that you wouldn't even think they'd want you to do. And you're like, why would you, and you find out the rationale, and things look very different in a large enterprise than they do for a small business. I remember I was with one customer who will be left unnamed, but I had a platform that logged notes that users were taking on content. So they'd read content and they would take notes against it. And for most of my customers, this was like the coolest feature there was. No one else did anything like this. And they just loved that we were tracking the notes and surfacing it back to them. And it was important because they would take the notes that their users were writing to themselves and use it to make the content better. It was training content. So then they could go and they can improve the training content, make it better for the next class. This one customer asked me, can you not track that? Can you specifically turn that off? I don't even want you to hold the data. Like, it can't exist. And I said, it'd be relatively easy to do that, but why would you want me to do that? It all came down to liability, right?
Okay.
We're servicing these other big global companies, and if we screw up and it costs them money and they sue us, and there's right? And now you have the lawyers coming in and they're searching our systems, and they show that we had a training class where the people who screwed up very clearly asked questions that indicated that they didn't understand the material and we didn't address it. We're on the hook. That data can't exist.
Wow.
And that's the way really big companies think. That is not the way startups think. So getting those questions and having those conversations And getting a few of those customers in your books early, A, they help a lot with marketing with sales later on to say, hey, this really big company is one of our big customers. But more importantly, you're forced to deal with situations up front that you wouldn't have to deal with later. Now, when you bring them in and how much of that work you do up front, it's kind of a business question and it's kind of based on your growth path a bit, but you at least need to be discussing those terms internally and understand what that future is going to look like so that you could say, hey, we're not going to do this now, but let's make sure we keep this in mind as we continue to build the platform. So at the point where we do want to add this, we haven't totally cut off our nose, and then only realize that we've made an impossible situation for us to go back and retrofit this.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Certainly plenty to think about, and probably the sooner the better from what I'm understanding for sure. And then what you mentioned in the beginning there, which is kind of what I want to talk about next, is like you said, if you have a couple of early stage customers and they're in the 50 people size, you're going to get features that are probably related to companies of a similar size versus enterprise. And that's a core part of what we talk about on this show as well too, is what we do with that kind of feedback from our customers. So I'd love to hear from you for the Troops team on the product side. What role does the qualitative data play that you get from customers, and how does your team go about getting it?
It plays a lot. As the company size decreases, I almost feel like the qualitative becomes a lot more important because you just don't have the quantitative data. Even if you have enough to make it statistically relevant, the problem is collection. You often just are short on resources to go out and even get the data together in the first place. In big companies, I've never had this problem. You always have enough people to go and get the data together, or you have systems in place, or that just kind of naturally happens in bigger companies. In small companies, the data is not there, and just to do work to put the technology in place to get the data is so taxing. You often you struggle to get it done. And then even if the data is there, who's going to go and analyze it? You got 50 people and it's all hands on deck. There's just no time for that. So you do what you can, but often you start falling back on qualitative data, and it feels like, it looks like, and it becomes increasingly important. I think having the right employees to kind of discern this is also part of it. The role of product has really changed over the years as far as what product management is and what it means and kind of what the skill set is. It used to be a lot more encompassing. People ask me, what is product management to begin with? What does a product manager do? What are you responsible for? And I always give the same answer, which is, as a product manager, you're responsible for the growth of the company. And that's it, right? You product-led growth of the business. That means increasing revenues, increasing retention rate. Your job is not to sit with the development all day and groom epics and stories. That might be part of the job, but that's a means to an end. Your job is to grow the company. That might be by building cool stuff. That might be by partnering. That might be by buying stuff off the shelf and gluing it together. But you better go and you better make sure that gets done. Increasingly, product looks like what used to be called business analysts, right? They're working with the dev team and they're figuring out, how should the product look? What should the buttons do? And that's always been part of product, but I think it's grown to be all encompassing. And what I see less of nowadays is product managers that really understand how the company's sales cycle works. What is the sales process? Being able to actually pitch the product and lead a demo. Pricing, one of the most important things you could do as a product manager. Pricing, increasingly, product managers just have no idea how to approach pricing, and they have no background or training in it. Understanding marketing and being able to work with the product marketers to make sure you're well marketed, and even who are our target audience, and how are we calculating the TAM and where are the opportunities. That's all really important, because if your mind is set on growth of the company, you're not focused on how much did someone like or dislike this little widget I just put out, or what was the feedback, or how do I make this widget better. Is if I spend $1 more on this widget, am I going to see $3 in return? Because if I'm not, I don't really care. And if you don't understand kind of the revenue facing side of the business, the pricing, the packaging, how your sales process works, who your target audience is, you can't actually figure out what the answers to those are. And it just ends up being, let's just keep changing the background colors and hoping more people will come and the salespeople are happy. Or let's just do what they say and hope the salespeople are going to do my job for me and tell me how to grow the business because no one else is doing it. I feel like I've gotten off course from what your original question was.
No, this opens up a whole other world of questions. So we're still on track. And I love this, the thinking about it in this way. It's often how I describe it as well too. I'd love to get your take on this because how I've heard it described before is almost like you're acting as a CEO, but a CEO of the product almost, right? When you're incorporating all of these aspects of, like you said, like return on investment for everything that we're doing, how is it having a positive effect on the business? At the end of the day, this product is part of the business and it needs to be a successful business. In order to do that, right, we have to grow the bottom line. So I've had a lot of conversations myself with people in product management or how they've defined it as product management that don't touch on any of these topics, and it petrifies me. Like, it scares me because I just can't imagine, like you said, you get caught, like there's so much, it's a tricky balance, right? Because there's so much to do as a product manager. You can work on like features and shipping stuff all day without realizing that you really have very little understanding of what kind of impact that's actually had on the health of the business. So I'd love to hear you talk about that as well too, right? How do you encourage someone? How do you train someone to be able to think like that? How do you help them understand what they need to prioritize? Because it's one of the most stressful jobs in tech, right? I'm probably a little biased there, but one of the most stressful jobs. There's just so much to do all the time, right? How do you get them to keep them in that mindset and then think that way as a product manager?
So the first question I always ask when I started a new company is, how much does a point cost? So a point would be like, if you're pointing stories in a development sprint, I want to know what a point actually costs. How much are the developers? How much is my team? What goes into it? What are the resources? What do we pay them on average? And I deduce it down to the actual value of a point. What's our investment? Um, that's how I look at the company, and that's how I need the people I work with to look at the company. This is an investment. Every single thing we do is an investment. If we're going to build a new feature, that's an investment. We're hoping there's some ROI. We're hoping that we're going to sell the product and we're going to get more money than we otherwise would have in excess of what we spent to actually build this. Same thing with support. Same thing with almost anything you're going to do in product or the R&D side. It's all investment money, and we're hoping to see a return on it. So I need to know, if we're going to go and build something, how much is that going to cost? I don't need some general, understand, point number or even time. You give me hours, you give me weeks. That doesn't mean anything. What's the actual, how much money are we paying? Once you get down to it being money and not time or points, you start looking at things very differently. When a customer says, hey, I really need you to build this for me, you can look at it and go, oh, hey, this is going to cost $30,000 to build. And then you got to start looking, well, how much is that customer actually earning us on an average basis? Wow, they're a $50,000 customer. So 60% of the revenue we're getting from this customer this year is going to be chewed up by us going and making this. Now you start asking questions like, if I don't build this, are they going to leave? Are they willing to pay for some of this? If you're just looking at points and time, you're never going to ask those questions. You're going to be like, oh, well, we have nothing else to do. And wow, that would be really nice. People might like it better. And this is the kind of feedback I often hear is, I just want people to like my product better. I don't want people to like my product better. I want people to pay more money for my product, or more people to use my product and to get value out of it, such that they're going to retain better, or I'm going to be able to upsell them or cross-sell them or increase pricing in the future. And that's the goal. That's the way you need to think about it and need to approach it. You have to, more than being a CEO, I feel like every employee needs to own the P&L, right? You really have to understand, what is our investment, what is our return, and how do the numbers work? When I was at one of my previous companies, it was actually Mimeo, our CEO, John Delbridge, used to get in front of the entire company once a quarter and go through all the financials. And he went really slowly. You had 900 people, you had crazy amounts of people on the phone, and he would crawl through our financials, and he would make sure he explained every little piece of it. He'd ask people if they understood. He wanted to make sure the employees understood how much money we're spending in every area, broken down by different regions and different product types. And he'd have people within the company present and talk about what the costs were going in. And I took a lot out of that. I thought that was great, making sure the employees really understand, what are we doing as a business? And I feel like increasingly product managers need to think that way, which is, this is an investment. Just like a personal investment, am I going to see a return out of this? Are we going to get back what we're paying for it?
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, it's got to increase that sense of ownership as well too. I think, like you said, thinking about it in terms of dollars and cents. I love what does a point cost? I can only imagine, if you've asked someone that and they've never been asked that before, what type of responses you must get but it sounds like a fascinating exercise. Do you actually go through and help them figure out literally how you would calculate like a dollar value to an actual like story point?
I could tell you what a story point cost at every company I've ever worked at.
Oh, that is so
Absolutely.
cool.
Absolutely. That's how I always think of things. And then after you get past kind of like the P&L mentality, which I think is of the utmost importance, for up and coming product managers, I always explain to them, this is a symphony and you're the conductor. You don't have to play any instrument. You don't have to do the research. You don't have to build it. You don't have to test it. You don't have to market it. You don't have to sell it. You don't have to support it. But you better make sure all those things are happening, right? Because if they're not, and the symphony's off key, it's all your fault. You need to figure out how to keep the symphony together and playing at the right moment, in the right time, the right music, and make sure that this whole thing is producing. And that's ultimately the job of a product manager. How am I getting the symphony through the song? And that's why it's really important that that product managers understand all the operations of the company, right? Not just the development side, but how the success team works, right? How do they retain customers? What do those conversations look like? Sit in on those conversations and hear what they look like, or even just listen to them on Gong or Chorus or whatever you're recording them on, and understand like what the feedback from the customers are. How's sales selling it? What's the pushback? What do the battle cards look like, right? How are they challenging some of the feedback, some of the blocks that prospects put in front of them? You have to see all of this to ensure that what you're building is the right stuff. And sometimes it's not about making it nicer or that. Sometimes it's about taking away the speed bumps that are blocking you from selling more. Often you can work with the sales team and just start identifying what's the stuff that's slowing you down. They complain about this all the time and this slows you down to sell. Maybe I want to build that. Maybe I can't charge for that, right? But maybe the shortened sales cycle is going to pay for itself because now I can actually get more productivity out of my sales team. And as a product manager, that's what you should be thinking about. How are we going to sell more units? And it's not often just about making the UI better, making it sexier, making it, do crazy new things. It's about how do I sell more product? How do I push it out the door? How do I clear the shelves? I always tell people being a product manager is not that different than selling a can of beans. Is if you go to the grocery store and you look for a can of beans and pick up any can, and there was someone in charge of that can of beans, right? That had to figure out, is there a market? What do consumers want? What does the competition look like, right? What kind of beans? Where are we going to get them from? Where are we going to source them from? Where are we going to can them? What kind of label do I have to put on it? How much are we going to sell them for? So there's no difference between that and doing enterprise SaaS technology. It's the same job.
Some seriously fantastic analogies in there. I'm going to steal a few of those and use those next time I have the opportunity to explain what product management is, as long as that's okay with you.
I'm hungry for beans now.
I love the orchestra, the conductor of the orchestra analogy. I think that's a really great way to articulate it. As one of the things that is always a challenge is even having to describe kind of what product management is, especially if you don't have context for it. I think that's a great way to both visualize it and understand kind of what the value add is there.
Product is a tough job. Everyone wants to be in it, but you got to be able to. You got to have really thick skin, and you got to be willing to be rattled all the time because there are 9,000 balls in the air, and you got to focus on all 9,000 at once. Not one of them can drop, right? And it's difficult. I'm not saying any other job in the company is not difficult. Product has its own specific flavor of difficulty in just being able to focus on so many things at once and so many things that are moving at once versus just going deeper in some of the other categories like development or sales. It's not for everyone. And, I'll tell you, there's days where even I'm at the end of it, I'm just totally burned out and I can't think of anything anymore. My mind goes numb. Yeah.
Been there too. Those are the days when you take a little bit of a break and then all the problems start to like solve themselves. You figure them out. You know what I mean? Every time I reach burnout and then I'm banging on a problem for I don't know how long, but then when I actually remove myself from the situation, it starts to make a little bit more, I find the clarity, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I always do it in the shower in the morning. All my best thoughts come to me. We've been working on this really hard problem. And this morning, it must have been 8 a.m. I'm like slacking at one of our lead developers. I'm like, I need to talk to you right away. I think I figured out. And he gets on and he's like in his pajamas. He looks like he just woke up. And I'm like, I have the answer. I got to talk to you about it.
It's awesome. You never know when the brilliance is going to strike. Well, this has been fantastic, Jonathan. I can't thank you enough. I could ask you questions about this all day. But before I let you go, I have two questions before we wrap the show. And the first
Sure.
one is, what resources would you share with myself and the audience? Books, blogs, anything along those lines?
Um, Personally, I love reading this stuff, any of Michael Porter's stuff. It is long and dry. If you don't like reading long, dry stuff, it's probably not for you. But as a product manager, it's possibly the most important stuff you will ever read. So take the time and make sure you're really familiar with it. It really structures your mind around how to just think about competition and the marketplace and things like costs and pricing. I mean, Porter's amazing. Um, some of the others, also, if you want to go deeper on pricing, there's a great book called The Strategy and Tactics of Pricing. Highly recommended. There's a bunch of different editions out there. Great book to just kind of wrap your mind around pricing more specifically. There's also a great book called Competition Demystified, which is really interesting way to think about how you bring your product to market and what the landscape looks like. There's a guy out there I worked with on some projects. His name is Jason Lynn, Lynn. He actually has a book list published online, which has a list of really great books. I would love to have my own book list, but he pretty much hit them all, so I can't. But if you want to see some great resources, go and look at Jason Lynn's book list, and he's got them all up there. It's amazing list of resources.
Awesome. And thank you for sharing. I'll link to those in the notes. And then the last question I have for you is, who should reach out to you and how can they get in touch?
Um, I think that's a multi-pronged question. If you're interested in what could be done for your organization, from the troops perspective, and how we can help you really surface more intelligence from your systems of record and put those right in front of your users and let them be able to action much more quickly and respond to changing business conditions on the fly, by all means reach out to me. On the other hand, if you are an up-and-coming product manager and you just want to talk, you have questions, you want my advice on stuff, I have a whole bunch of people like that who I meet with on a regular basis, and I love to. It's really interesting for me even to hear what problems they're struggling with and how they've approached it. You never know who you're going to learn from, and I learn great things all the time. Please feel free to reach out.
Thank you for that. And I'm definitely going to upload that myself now. Every time I speak with Jonathan, I learn something tremendously valuable. So please take advantage of that. And Jonathan,
It was the beans, right?
That's right. It was the beans. Totally sold me on that. What's the best way for them to kind of get in touch with you? Would it be connecting over LinkedIn, or would you?
Yeah, connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm Jonathan Bartlett on LinkedIn. You'll find me. Head of product at Troops. Please feel free to reach out. I check LinkedIn every day, so happy to talk to you.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for being here on the show, Jonathan, and sharing your experience and wisdom with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. The Customer Conversations podcast is brought to you by the team at LearnWhy. LearnWhy integrates with all of your customer-facing tools to organize feedback and extract actionable insights. Empower your team to start growing your bottom line today with insights from qualitative data powered by LearnWhy. You can find out more at either learnwhy.co or by emailing our team at sales@learnwhy.co. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Customer Conversations podcast. If you or someone you know has expertise in growth, marketing, or product, please have them reach out to either Sean or Stuart to learn more about becoming a guest on our show. Our team can be reached by email at support@learnwhy.co.